I'm Justin McCartney, and he is Murray Macaulay.
He is. Absolutely am. Hello?
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether you can hear me or not.
Oh, I can hear you loud and clear.
Good.
Loud and clear. Loud and clear tonight. So
I was just actually checking there to make sure that the match had finished 1-0 to Chelsea. So congratulations, all Chelsea fans. Man, Pep Guardiola pissed off again.
Hold on. Mark, have you been watching the football, Mark? Darren Barney Milligan, have you been watching the football? I don't even know what football is. Julie Mason, have you been watching the football? Patrick Mulkey, have you been watching the football? Michael Matthews, have you been watching the football? I didn't even know anybody was playing today. It's a super day. I was out walking all day today, Mark.
I was actually gainfully employed today, Justin. I was working this afternoon. Okay. So, yeah, beautiful day. A lovely sunny day. And it was the Champions League final, Justin. So, yeah.
All right. Is that football, is it?
It is, yes.
All right.
Your sporting glory days is maybe past you, Justin. You don't maybe appreciate this.
Well, I actually won the winning one in the Schools World Cup when it was Mexico in 1983. You know.
Aye. Now we've got a big show tonight.
We do have a big show tonight. Yes, we've got a couple of fantastic guests who are both waiting in the wings patiently for us. Mm-hmm. Yes.
We have an interview with a rather charming artist that we were talking to during the week, who's done something a bit weird and crazy, which we kind of like. Well, it's not kind of like, we do like. And then, of course, obviously, we have our week in Whisky.
Okay, and that's our version of the news, Marty, isn't it?
It is, yes, Justin. We've been doing this now for about 6 months. So our week in Whisky.
But we're getting you viewers every week. I mean, yes. There's a guy there, Tony Sillett. Never heard that name before tonight. If you're watching for the first time, always say hello, comment, like, and share, and we'll give you a mention on Facebook and on YouTube as well. Have you heard that name before, Tony Sillett? Have you?
I don't think so. So.
There you go. Here's one we've always heard before. William McLennan.
Yes.
I'm actually going down the North Coast tomorrow. I'll be in with you if you're down there, actually, William. So there you go.
Trying to bag a free coffee.
I'm trying to bag a free coffee and a lunch and a lunch. Went for a wee dander myself. There you go. Yes, we'll get you all tonight at some point. Trevor Watson is in Foreman. Are we getting a wee trip to Foreman soon, are we?
I don't know. We'll see. We'll see.
All right. Shall I hit the button? Shall I?
Hit the button. Play the tune, Justin.
All right. No, what about that?
Love it. As always, love it. Now, this is the week in Whisky. So, first up, this week the Times reported that there's a potential merger between two of the titans of the drinks world, Brown-Forman and Pernod Ricard. Now, they're said to be in discussions, and that would bring Jack Daniels and Jameson under the same roof, for example, along with, literally dozens of other brands.
Wow! What would they call the thing? Because basically it would be that would be a mouthful, wouldn't it?
Well, if it was Pernod Ricard Brown-Forman, it sort of sounds like one of those triple-barreled surnames, some lofty aristocrat, or maybe a wrestling match or something. Pernod Ricard versus Brown-Forman.
Yes.
So I don't know. Who knows what they would come up with? But the idea is, Pernod Ricard obviously is the parent company of Irish distillers, so they would get better access again to the US market, obviously. And the reason that they're talking about this is it would be really to rival Diageo. To give you an idea, Diageo's turnover for 2020 was £11.75 billion. Okay. Pernod Ricard, obviously being a European within the EU, their turnover is about €9 billion, so about £7.75 billion. Brown Foreman, well, they're the wee guys out of this. Their turnover is only a mere $3.5 billion. So that equates to about £2.5 billion. So if you combine Pernod Ricard and Brown Foreman, they're in excess of £10 billion turnover between the two of them. Now,
wow.
Yeah, just massive corporations, But Brown Foreman brands are Jack Daniels, Woodford Reserve, Islay and Irish Whisky, Old Forester, Benriach, Glengassow, El Jimador,
Right.
Tequila. So they're Finlandia vodka, for example. Pernod Ricard, Absolute Vodka, Jameson, Redbreast, Glenlivet, Chivas, Ballantines, Martell Cognac. The Indian market they're quite big in. They have Imperial Blue, 100 Pipers, Royal Stag. So if this goes ahead, basically you're going to end up with two massive corporations. But I mean, phenomenally big corporations that will control vast sections of the drinks world.
Do they need to do that?
Well, they don't overlap a huge amount. So in many regards, so it wouldn't necessarily be anything that the Monopolies Commission would say a huge amount about. So do they? Who knows? I mean, these corporate decisions are a level above and beyond us. The problem that they're going to have is both companies are in essence still family-run businesses. So, for example, Alexander Ricard is the grandson of the founder, Paul Ricard, and Brown Foreman's CEO is George Garvin Brown IV, who's a direct descendant of the founder, Garvin Brown. So you have family.
They're not going to want to do that, are they?
Well, who's going to say we're running it now? We're running the whole thing. So it's
Marty. You'd be good at it.
You send me in. I'm telling you, I check things up.
You could be like JRU, and you could just axe the whole thing.
You could be Bobby. You.
Could I walk out of the shower 2 seasons later and still be back in the room?
No, it's one of these things. I mean, I don't think on a day-to-day level people wouldn't necessarily see a massive impact straight away. But as it goes forward, these things always have a way of filtering down and cutting brands that they don't like and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's interesting to see. But Diageo heading towards £12 billion turnover. I mean, it's just phenomenal, just incredible. Well, there you go.
Where are we heading next then? Because we've a lot to get through tonight, don't we?
We do.
Oh, I love this show. It's the Blue Oyster Cult. I love it.
This one is we're heading to New York Harbor. Now, we do like an environmental story. We like environmental good news, and I like this one because Talisker is sponsoring a project called the Billion Oyster Project, right? Now, it started back in 2014 by two New Yorkers, Murray Fisher and Pete Walonsky, something like that, Polish name, I think, who wanted to restore the environmentally destroyed New York Harbor, which at one point was famous for its oysters. Now, they've been trying to raise awareness of New York's rich oyster history, and so far they've installed 14 oyster reefs. They've discovered that oysters are now starting to reproduce in what's still one of the busiest ports in the world. They've got 10,000 volunteers, 6,000 students, 100 New York schools, and 75 restaurants using these.
Right.
Now, yeah. Now, one of the things about oysters is a single oyster filters 50 gallons of water a day. Now, you extrapolate that up, and obviously they're purifying the water. Now, the last oyster bed was 1927. So this project, they're setting up these beds, and so far they've done well in excess of 20 million oysters there. So
do they get to eat the oysters too in the end? Do they, Marty?
Well, the thing is, if you go onto the website, it says, it talks about how they're supplying restaurants, etc., and then there's a big disclaimer at the bottom that says it is potentially hazardous to eat oysters from New York Harbour. So, yes, they're selling them, but let them pick them. Don't be trying to get them yourself. Now, Talisker's probably a good one to go with oysters because it's got that peaty, smoky, and the briny, the salt aspect to Talisker is a nice compliment for oysters. So, yeah, good on them. I like that. I like that project that caught my eye.
I like that idea too myself, actually. I like that. It's a good one. I do like oysters. They go better with Guinness than they do with whiskey, but do they not?
Well, that's always a traditional thing, Justin. But there's a lot more flavour in whiskies, flavour ranges in whiskies than there is in than just in Guinness. But no, I like that project. I think it's a nice one.
Where are we heading next tonight then?
We're going to talk about whiskey lotteries, Justin, and the fact that 11,000 people registered to try and get a bottle of Redbreast Dream Cask. And did you get yours?
Didn't get it.
No, neither did I.
I didn't get it because I'd be asking you for the money if I got it.
So, 29-year-old, all the roasted sherry finished. 924 bottles. So this is the fourth release of the Dream Cask, which is selected by Billy Layton every year. Let's be honest; these are going to start popping up on auction sites. There's one already on an auction site, but it's for charity, so I can't say a big lot about that. But next month, if you really want one, you can pick them up, and it'll probably only cost you about £1,500. You'll have to pay triple what people did, I would imagine. Maybe not. But this is the problem now with these rare and collectible limited edition whiskies. Rassy Distillery, just off the Isle of Skye, on the island of Rassy, they have been doing their inaugural release, and it's done by lottery as well. So Pappy Van Winkle, bourbon over in the US, Macallan have been doing them. When they're starting to bring out these limited edition, highly collectible ones, I suppose the only way they can do it now is by a lottery, and you have to supply a phone number because there was people cheating. There was cheating, maybe a strong word, but they were trying to get as many bottles registered or many entries registered as possible to get as many bottles as possible to then flip them straight away. So there's such demand now for these rare bottles because they do escalate in price quite quickly. So first releases obviously are very collectible because you only get one shot at it, really.
Peter Stewart said didn't get it.
But neither did most people.
He said he's seen it in the site for €2,000.
Yeah. So whether you get it for 2,000, whether somebody's going to pay €2,000 for it or not, I don't know. But they are. They'll be highly collectible. Let's just be honest. So some people will do really well out of it and make themselves some money. Not themselves.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Right. Where are we going now tonight then? Because we've got two guests waiting in the wings.
Well, during the week, it was brought to my attention that Waterford have decided to shake things up a bit with their labelling. Now, just for reference, this is the standard Waterford bottle, and quite a nice label it's got too. I quite like that. That sort of texture, and it's got the nice gold lettering and stuff. But they've decided that their standard blend, or cuvee, as they don't like to use the word blend, their cuvee is coming out later on in the year, in September, and they're going to have a bespoke piece of art done for it. So we got caught up with Leah Hewson, who's the artist, during the week.
You've gone to town. You've actually got me a test card. You've got me a test card for the start of the show. That must have cost a fortune to get something like that done. And you've got the artist that designed the test card as well.
Justin, I didn't spare any expense. You done the sound for the week in whiskey news, I thought I'd splash out and get a bit of artwork done, brighten the place up a bit.
Wow, that's fabulous. I mean, Leah, how much did you spend on my fabulous artwork?
I can't tell you that.
Right.
It's a secret.
Now, it's not actually our artwork, by the way. It's not for us. Normally, whiskey bottles, the labelling on whiskey bottles are this sort of dull grey, just say the name. Or you can go to Cologne, where you get all scuffed up and a bit of black marker. Or we get wee grousey birds and Scotty dogs. But no, our friends at Waterford have decided to push the boat out a bit. Surprise, surprise. And they got Leah to come in and design a bespoke label. This is what's going to go on the label of the cuvee, their basically their flagship bottling. Now, Leah, how did you get roped into this?
I don't know why they trusted me with the job, but anyway, it's worked out in the end, I think.
I think it has.
Yeah, I hope so. So I think I just got an email one day, and it was open. I'm always open to collaboration as an artist because I spend a lot of time working on my own and in the studio by myself. So any opportunity to kind of challenge myself or work to different briefs is always welcome. So then they just brought me through the company ethos, like what they were all about, and I think instantly I was just sucked in. I suppose the attention to detail for every single aspect of the company, and just, I suppose, the kind of respect each person had for each other, and the space that every person has, like within the company, to kind of be creative and to express their own opinions and stuff, was something that really drew me in. So I went down to get the grand tour of Waterford Distillery, and they brought me through the whole process and explained, how they were how they'd introduced the idea of terroir into whiskey making, which blew my mind, actually. So there was a lot to learn and a lot to take in, which was all very exciting. And I got the sense of everybody that I met down there that they were kind of all in on a secret or something, and they were all giddy with this secret, and they were letting me into their world and trusting me in the world of, Waterford Distillery, which was really infectious, actually.
Well, it is kind of infectious. I honestly think they're starting to really get more and more momentum as people begin to understand what it is they're trying to do and where they're going. For the first part of the whole story, when they were doing the single farms, I was like, I don't know where this is going. Are they just trying to get people to do all the collections? And then you talk to people and you see they're actually aiming for what they're going to consider their best product that's going to be available all the time, and that's coming with your artwork on the front of it. As
far as I gather, their main ethos is to really kind of push the boat out and to challenge, what the perception of whiskey is and what it should be, and to create sort of a full sensory experience, from the visual of the bottle itself right through to when you get the aromas and then the taste of it. The whole experience of it is a completely different angle, as far as I understand it to be, in the world of whiskey.
Leah, how long does it take from a concept to completion?
It's very difficult for me to say, because I'm usually working on a few different things at one time. Yeah. And I like to sort of give myself breathing room throughout the process to kind of change my mind. So I keep the process fresh, in a sense, instead of just working on one thing from start to finish. Yeah. I'll step away from it for a while, make sure I'm making the right decisions, and go back to it time and time again. So, but this particular painting is the first sort of way that I've painted in this way. And I think just by gaining more of an understanding of the complexity of distilling whiskey, and the layers that are involved in it, I really wanted to create this sort of in-depth methodology to how I was going to make this painting as well. So just with the idea of having, you know, a seed that turns into grain that is then given a new life as whiskey, just that process of transformation in nature, so the symbiosis of technology within that as well. So I think where I began was I made 2 images using computer generation and sort of editing software. And what I wanted to do was emulate the sort of the experience that you get where when you're drinking this whiskey, where it's like you're kind of almost able to understand it in its entirety, but it's just there's an overload of sensory experiences going on, and it's all firing away, you know. So I think by overlaying the 2 images and bringing them back into paint, so bringing them from technology into sort of human touch, from computer generated images into painting, and overlapping the images into strips, the brain becomes a little bit sort of overwhelmed by the information which is coming through the eye. So it's very difficult for it to kind of process the whole thing in its entirety in one go.
Yeah.
So, and then also introducing the red and the green sort of vibrating colors of it, and then the neon, just creating that whole sense of illusion, while keeping it sort of playful and mischievous as well. You know?
I think it definitely is. And it's called binary assimilation. That's the name of the piece.
That's what happens to you on Star Trek when the Borg get you.
Aye, that.
No, I never watched Star Trek, so.
Now, are they going to keep the blue bottle? Is it? Can we get in?
Yeah,
They're going to keep the standard this blue bottle, and this is going to go on the front of the bottle.
Yeah. Now there might be a few other changes, but I don't know how much I'm allowed to say. Just
no, you're like
Mark Rainier won't. He won't mind. He won't mind.
That's all right, Mark. That's okay. He says yes. No, you're a whiskey drinker yourself, Leah. Yes.
I dabble. I dabble a little bit, but yeah. But I had Ned, the head distiller, up to the studio there, I think last week or 2 weeks. So he was really giving me, because I stupidly drove down to Waterford Distillery when I was doing the tour, so I couldn't try any of it, you know. But they sent me away. They sent me away with loads of bottles, which was very generous. So when Ned came up here, he brought me through a few of the different ones, and actually I got to try to taste. I tasted the cuvee, which was really exciting. So. Yeah, so I mean,
there's lots of people looking forward to this.
Very honored.
Right.
Yeah, I felt very honored.
Ned doesn't strike me as the most, shall we say, artistic appreciator of art, maybe.
Do you know what? When he came up, because I was teaching him how to paint, and when he came up, I think the main thing with being creative is just trusting the process and throwing yourself into it. You know, a lot of it can be a lack of self-confidence, and I think Ned actually just threw himself into it, and he really enjoyed his time. And we sent him away with 2 paintings, so one that I had done and one that he had done. And I think it was something that was very personal to him. But he's very passionate, you know, when you're speaking to him about, you know, he sticks his nose into the glass of whiskey and all of these things. He's very descriptive with what he experiences with his, you know, with the experience, the senses of. I
imagine I know which one of those which one of those paintings will end up hanging on the wall. I imagine I know which one. No, Leah, so when
maybe that's the next label. Who knows? Maybe his painting is the next label.
Yeah, I don't think so somehow. But you never know. You never know.
You never say never again.
Say never.
Well, that's the thing. They're full of surprises down there, you know.
Well, the one thing is, as it currently stands, I think the bottle looks pretty sharp. You know, they've got that lovely cap, the glass stopper and stuff on it.
Yeah.
And I think it looks pretty good.
Yeah.
With your label on the front of it, it's going to absolutely ping off out of the shelves. It's going to look absolutely, totally like Star Trek to paraphrase Justin.
And Marty has a sneaky suspicion that the final product might be something extra special.
I have a funny feeling I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be something well worth.
I think you might be right. Yeah.
Right, Leah, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, lovely to meet you guys. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, and, I appreciate it.
And we'll see you again soon. So take care.
No, there you go, Marty. What did you make of that? Pretty special.
It was, and whatever they're doing at Waterford, you have to say that on the front of this is you're going to notice it on a shelf. You know, it is going to stand out, and yeah, as a piece of design. I'll be interested to hear what Mark has to think about it. What our guest coming on? Lovely guest. She was really, really absolutely charming.
Fantastic stuff. And certainly, it's completely different than anything else we've ever seen before, or will ever see again, possibly. Yeah.
Well, we'll put it. No, I think you can possibly see whenever people do something new. I mean, this is a typical whiskey label. Nothing particularly wrong with it. Very descriptive, but let's be honest, a bit bland. Now, before we bring on our two guests, I've done a little bit of contacting a few guys this week to find out whether or not they're opening up for visitors. With the restrictions easing up here, I wanted to just check round. So, Hinch Distillery is opening up for tours this Tuesday. So, I'm not exactly sure. You'll need to check the website for details on all of these, just because it could change very quickly. But Hinch is opening this week for tours, so if you want to get down there and see what the setup is.
Something else, that place, something else.
Oh, it is as well. It's well designed. It's well done. Well laid out. Cologne are opening in the next few weeks. It'll be when the website's up and running, so you can go down and meet with Brendan and hear him ranting about pot style Marsh Bells and stuff, as I'm sure our guests will really tell us. Now, Boatyard, the tours are up and running this week. Again, you'll have to check website just for details and see what's what and costs and stuff. And I didn't bother asking about costs because I just wanted to find out if they were opening up. Now, Aikmanville, Bushmills, the Radamon Estate down with David and Fiona and Copeland, they don't have tours up and running at the minute. And I was in touch with Aikmanville and Bushmills. I was talking to David today down at Shortcross. They have no plans to open up at the minute because they said it's a bit too risky.
Everything's up in the air, basically. This
is it. But I just wanted to touch base. I hate that. I hate saying that, but there's not really anything. Touch base just to find out what their plans were and see if Bushmills and stuff are opening up, and they have no plans for the foreseeable. So there you go.
Okay. Right. Excellent stuff. Now, it's as well this isn't on a Saturday night because we'd be telling you not to watch it. No, we wouldn't. We would be telling you to watch it. It's a really top-notch show. We've seen a little bit of a clip of it. You can actually watch a little bit of a clip of it yourself if you want to, because I can share that with you. But we have two fellow whiskey enthusiasts, experts.
No. We have got one academic expert who I would argue probably knows as much about certainly the history of whiskey and stuff as anybody on the planet, Irish whiskey as anybody about. And we've got Mark, who's I don't think he's as well versed in the whiskey stuff.
Well, actually, this program is going to be on tomorrow night on BBC Two, isn't it?
Yes, tomorrow night on BBC Two. So check your listings. It's available on iPlayer. Now we'll bring them on and they can tell us.
Yes, here we go. Stand by, gentlemen. Here you come. And as if by magic, you're in the room.
Hello.
Good evening.
How are we all?
Good.
Good to see you, Mark.
Good to see you, Fionnan.
Long time no speak since this morning.
About 10:30 this morning.
Yeah. I it feels like it hasn't been that long since I've talked to you either, Fionnan.
Yeah,
Because
no.
I was on the phone with him during the week, and I heard a wee clink as oh, are you having a drink? I'll have one with you.
Terrible reception down here. You hear all sorts of noise.
And it was 4.5 hours later, I was still on the phone. And yes, I ended up imbibing slightly more than I had planned. Now, we are joined by Fionnan O'Connor and Mark Thompson, who are the two presenters of BBC show that's on tomorrow night, all about Ulster Whisky. So, which one wants to go first and tell us what it's all about?
Mark.
Firstly, I'm feeling super self-conscious with this colour here, but it has been a scorcher of a day here on the glorious East Coast. And so I've been out digging the garden and stuff like that, and I've got absolutely wasted. So
You need a makeup girl, Mark, to do your makeup for you, so you don't glow red like a lobster.
I clearly do. As you will see through the programme, there was zero makeup budget, and I don't think either of us are very proud of our appearance through lockdown, but there you go. But no, it's been almost exactly and very appropriately 3 years since the idea of doing this program was first mooted, and it was definitely August 2018 that I was over at Ecklandville, which are just across the peninsula from me here. There's about 4 miles between me and Ecklandville. And in my proper day job over the years as a graphic designer, I used to be managing director of a big design firm in Belfast. Went self-employed a while ago. They found me, we get on very well, and I'm back and forth there a fair bit. Anyway, Fionnan happened to be there, and it was clear to me that this idea of doing a programme, he was the right man to introduce to the producer, Sean McGuire. And after a series of conversations, he foolishly agreed to be part of this adventure. And we have had a great time sharing knowledge and getting to know each other, and then, of course, on our actual adventure.
Excellent. Now, Fionnan, what were you doing up at Ecklandville?
I was enjoying a perfectly good tour at Ecklandville. And these people collared me and said, right, you're going to be on the television. I said, no, you can't. There's people that'll see me and they don't know where I am. And luckily, they left it alone for 3 years, and now we suddenly appeared in a kind of a renewed, and there was nothing in the middle. So no, it's been a lot of fun. And yeah.
Now, Mark, you've said about your background being in graphic design. Okay.
Yep.
Now you've had some success in the graphic design drinks world, correct?
Well, I mean, it was probably about 4 years ago that I was introduced via a prior client to Gareth Irvine of Copeland. And so Gareth and I started to do a wee bit of work which brought them to life. And of course now they've relocated to Donaghadee, and I continue to do more work with Gareth. And you may have seen the set of gins, the set of rums, and then just last week their debut blend. And it was around that time then started to get to know Shane and Jarlath and Anne-Marie and Suzanne and Peter and everybody over at Ecklandville. And our families kind of, oops, there goes the earphone. Our families would have known each other. Oh, you know, my father certainly would have been very familiar with Jarlath's father, and it's a small farming community. We all kind of know each other.
The whole place isn't that big, let's be honest.
No, look, it's really not. It's really not. And well, you know, one conversation led to another conversation, and because over the years I've been very fortunate to work in some big design agencies and big ad agencies, work with some great clients, work with some really great colleagues. Went self-employed a while ago, and had a few conversations with Shane, and I know that they had done some really, really great work with Drinksology over the years, including, of course, bringing Dunville's back to the retail shelves in the category. And yeah, for the last 3 years, we've done various things. In fact, I think, Marty, the first time I met you was at the launch of the great big VR Port Morant 18-year-old box set in Belfast. I vaguely remember we crossed paths that.
We did. It was upstairs in Orpheus, the rather lush Orpheus.
Here, listen, as long as it wasn't the Blue Oyster.
Yeah. No, but yeah, Anybody that knows me knows I think pretty much everything they do at Dunville's is super. I think the releases, the single cast releases, are just fabulous. The rum cast one, I just wish it was a bit cheaper. Otherwise, I would possibly be having one tonight. But no, the stuff that they do is fabulous. But you touched on Dunville's there. Now, if you're going to make a program about whiskey in Ulster, you can't. Dunville's is really one of the big hitters, certainly of its time. So, what can we expect? I take it they make an appearance or two in the show.
Well, I think, well, certainly, yes, they do. But I think it would probably be better for Fionnan to start at the origin of the story, because we don't just leap into the golden age of the late 1800s. There's far, far more to discover than just that era. But yes, the Royal Irish Distilleries is in there. It has to be in there, given the scale of it all. But we worked really hard, even under lockdown and travel restrictions, to get away out of Belfast and to go across the water and to try to tell as broad a story as was practically achievable within the sort of 55-ish minutes that you have to do that.
Now, Fionnan, the origins of Ulster whiskey. Now, I don't want to preempt what's in the show, okay? I don't want to basically tell us what's in the show, but you're the best man probably on the planet to tell us about how whiskey. It's hard to say, because it's the whiskey as we know it's not whiskey was or referred to as Ushkaba, okay? So how did that evolve in Ulster and Scotland, sort of symbiotically, or the heritage of it, if you like?
Yeah, I suppose. And again, like I mean, if I go on too long, just make an X sign and I'll shut up. It's a topic that is quite close to me. But it was something I was glad to talk about, because often what happens is you hear whiskey history from whiskey people, and it kind of goes round and round in a circle. You repeat things you read in whiskey magazines and books and whatnot, and there's a lot of very easy stories that you hear, like Irish monks brought whiskey to Scotland, and none of that is remotely defensible. It's pure gibberish, the wrong century for starters. But if you look at and any of these kind of this happened, so then that happened stories tend to kind of on further investigation to not hold a lot of water, let alone whiskey. But one thing you do see is folk grassroots carry over very, very closely between the kind of North Ulster coast and the Inner Hebrides and the Mull Kintyre at a very early stage. And you see that continue down the centuries, right up to the age of illegal poaching. And when you're talking about what's actually an agricultural practice, it's really, you have kind of two histories of whiskey. And you're right to say early on, it's not whiskey at all. It's medicinal alcohol. It's knowledge of distilling. And in one history, you're talking about who can read and who can transmit and who would have that knowledge. And it almost certainly does come there first, because it is technology. Yeah. And then the second history is agricultural distilling. When does it become a farmyard practice? And when you're talking about the dissemination, one of the strongest and really as yet untapped histories is the number of manuscripts that appear on both sides. So, for instance, at one point, and unfortunately, this was originally part of the thesis, it'll never end up in the thesis. It's a footnote to one sentence, because it doesn't really tie in with the Marsh Bells history. But I went looking for the first recorded use of the word Ishkabaha, or the phrase Ishkabaha, to see, when does that first appear? As opposed to Aquavita is to this and to that. And it's a medical treatise written by a guy named Taigdal O'Higgin. And it's actually a translation of an Italian medical treatise. And what a lot of people don't know is that the Red Book of Ossory in Ireland, which we often cite as the first record of whiskey, has nothing to do with whiskey whatsoever. It is also a copy of that same Italian manuscript. So it's called the Consilia Medicinalia. It was written in Bologna, and it was disseminated around Europe as essentially something every doctor on the cutting edge ought to know. And that's what's in the Red Book of Ossory. It's essentially a cribbed version of that. So to call it whiskey is not really fair, but at the same time, it is instrumental in the dissemination of distilling know-how. But the one in Ossory, which is written by a Norman Franciscan, so, you know, slightly different tradition to what people think of as, you know, it's not Ionian Christianity anyway. And so it's not really the same group of monks. In fact, it's much later. But anyway, you have that tradition there, and they're clearly just copying the Concilia. And then you have the same manuscript appearing in Irish, or in Middle Irish. And there's the question, well, did they copy it from the Franciscans, or did they get it independently? But it's the same thing. It's just Aqua Vita becomes Ishkabaha, and they're kind of cribbed. And you get what were called Materia Medicae, which were kind of doctors' handbooks. And you have various medical kindreds. You know, you have families like the Hickeys, etc., in Ireland. And then infamously in Scotland, you have the Beaton family. And I started seeing the same versions appear on one side, and then you see Beatons, specifically the Beatons out in Mull. There's a lot of their stuff hanging around, and you see this is clearly one thing disseminated in one direction, one the other. And what probably happened, it's not like the Beatons rocked up with bowls of whiskey. They rocked up as part of an extension of a shared cultural sphere that, you know, by that time, you know, Dalriada proper was gone, but, you know, the cultural memory can, you know, via the Lordship of the Isles remains intact, that same shared space. And so you have the Beaton family brought over to Islay, but that link back and forth, not only down into Ireland, but again, by proxy to the Mediterranean. And especially you start seeing not just the Italian manuscripts, but Avicenna, whom the Italians were copying in the first place, the Islamic sources for a lot of the distilling. And so anyway, I worked up in a buzz to Mark and to Sean at the time, largely, you know, leading up to getting Sean to take us to Islay. So there's a scene where we do go out to Kilhoman, and Mark pours a little bit of Bushmills on the cross, just to remind everybody on Islay where the whiskey came from. You know?
Which could get us into a whole lot of trouble in Scotland, but hey.
Well, I don't know enough about the chemistry to know what alcohol has effect on that kind of granite. You know, there's an mark of Bushmill.
I always like to bring up the
National Heritage Centre, you know.
the fact that Bushmills 1608, you know, the first whiskey license granted, sent over. 1609, they passed the Statutes of Iona in the Western Isles of Scotland to prohibit them importing French wine, because they were all drinking Bordeaux and clarets and all this as they were shipping off the shellfish over to France. So to me, that tells me they're drinking wine. The guys across the water more prevalent in distilling. So from where I am, I live in Glenarm, so I look across the Campbelltown, and it's literally just across the water. Islay is just across it's so close, people get surprised by how close it was. And the fact that you have these two statutes issued by the same monarch, granting people the right to distill and prohibiting people the right to import wine, to me it tells you that, well, they're not going to stop drinking, they just have to go, we'll just do this stuff instead, you know?
Yeah, although I would interject there, Marty. One, the Statutes of Iona actually did apply to whiskey in Islay as well, which was already there. So they do say their inordinate love of wines and aqua vita, and two, just horrendously ineffective. They kept drinking both like that. Just a waste of paper, really.
Prohibition never seems to work out well.
Fascinating, because that was part of James Stewart's crackdown on Hebridean autonomy more generally. And, you look at the MacDonald-Stewart antagonism that was going back and forth for so long. And there is a certain, how would you put it, spit in the eye when the Statutes of Iona are passed, because by that time the Stuarts had pretty much broken the spine of the MacDonalds. Yeah. You have the bloody Bay battle, one of the MacDonald dynasty essentially eats itself internally. The son murders the father. But anyway,
it sounds like Game of Thrones a bit. There's
a touch of that. Not much as a touch. There's quite a healthy helping of that. But what's interesting is when this crackdown comes to Islay, curiously, there's a lot of stuff imposed harsh restrictions. Again, a lot of it was gestural, say, the power has changed here. And there's one strong exception made for Fergus Beaton. And he says, our dearly beloved Fergus Beaton, blah, blah, blah. And the idea that these people even then had such a stature that they were exempt from these kinds of crackdowns. And remember that the Beatons, who were the hereditary physicians to the McDonalds, immediately there's a Beaton at the side of every Stewart for God knows how many generations. There's
I must tell the McDonald's, you just live across the lane from me. This guy's messed up big time.
Yeah.
We've had a couple of questions in, guys, Mark and Fionn. Julie Mason says, sounds very interesting. Looking forward to watch the programme. Mark, is the programme just on BBC Two Northern Ireland, or can you get it all across the UK?
That is a very good question. It will certainly be on BBC iPlayer, which I think is accessible anywhere in the world, actually, as long as you are a TV license payer. I know some folk from Canada were in touch with me today, and because they have an address here and they've got a TV license, they can log in and do all that sort of thing. Yeah. So if you miss it for whatever reason tomorrow night, iPlayer for 30 days after that is the place to go.
Yes, I think there'll be big interest. Now, amazing work on the historic Marsh Bells. I noticed in your book that there was a picture of Burt, sort of malting house, and I've been to Burt, and Marty says there's a place like that in the Ards, but believe it or not, my mum and me are convinced that there is a building like that somewhere in East Antrim. Am I right or am I wrong?
Mark, you're the...
Whereabouts in East Antrim? I genuinely don't know. I mean, the Ards one I know very well because living where I am, the most easterly point of the entire island, I drove in and out of Newton Ards on the school bus every day, and there it was, the big maltings on the hill, which just at the moment actually is being converted into apartments. So it's something I know very well. The East Antrim one, I'm not really sure.
Well, you see, Justin thinks it's out round Newton Crumlin or Skerry direction.
Really?
But I know there was there wasn't a distillery out there. There's a, I think it was more like a bottle and blending plant, that kind of thing.
Okay.
It
was quite short lived as far as I remember. I can't remember the exact.
The Burt distillery out in Donegal was very, very, very short lived. It was an attempt to capitalize on the reputation of Inishowen, and so it was the only legal distillery built in Donegal in not recorded history, but certainly post-industrial history, and it blipped out very, very quickly. But the building is still there. But the Ards maltings out in the Ards Peninsula was, quite a strong player, distributing malt to a lot of Ulster distilleries, including Bushmills, which I'm drinking now.
What are you drinking now?
Bushmills. Of course, I've all the, I'm here. I'm outnumbered 3-1. So I've carefully hidden all bottles of Powers under the floorboard. Arrayed my various Bushmills. But this is the distillery visitor center 12-year-old.
But the 12-year-old.
So this is when they first came out. So a good while back. I had this one, and then the other one I popped is something I picked up from a song on an Italian auctioneer. And it's the Bushmills 10 from 1986. And the reason I'm interested in this one is, as far as I can tell, this is the very first Irish whiskey ever that was labeled as a single malt, not a pure malt, not malt whiskey, because again, the term single malt became a thing in the 60s and really in the 70s, after you have Glenfiddich kind of popularized the term. Yeah. At that time, Bushmills was only selling a blended incarnation of itself. And so in the 80s, when Bushmills finally puts out a single Bushmills, is the first, and now, really in terms of Irish whiskey repivoting itself into single malt, this is where it begins. Yeah. And I picked this up for less than the price of the normal Bushmills 10. So I'm very proud.
I never realized that.
Fucking 30 quid.
Right, hang on.
As the Italian
I'll be back in a minute, guys, to go for a wee Google here if I see if I can find it.
Mark, when you did the program, what surprised you the most when you did your research? Because I know you were a bit astounded about them doing Scottish whiskey in Ireland in the sort of trailer. Was that what struck you as profound, or are there other revelations in the program we'll have to wait for tomorrow night to see?
Well, I suppose, I mean, like Marty, who has a view of Scotland from where he lives, I have this a more southerly view from where I am. Right out the window here is the end of the Mull of Galloway, and I see the lighthouse twinkling there all the time. And of course, Bladnoch is just beyond there, and all of that lovely tradition in the lowlands. And in general, the thing that has always interested me is the connection that we have with here, whether that's linguistic or literary or historical, and to discover that in whiskey as well was not a huge surprise, because I was vaguely aware of it from collecting old books and old stories and things. You could see whiskey references the whole way through, and of course with Old Cumber being not far from me, I know old folk in their 80s who remember it when it was open, and they would still refer to it as Old Cumber rather than Old Cumber. And there was one day when I was at art college. Oh, look at that! Oh, he's showing off now.
Yeah.
When I was at art college in Belfast and I had time on my hands, I used to go hooking around all the wee antique shops and the Donegal Pass and Smithfield and all around there.
Bric-a-brac shops, that sort of thing.
And you see, but back then, like I'm showing my age now, I'm on the brink of 50, but back then there was so much wonderful stuff that you could find. And there was one day, and it will haunt me until my dying day. I went into the Donegal Pass place, and upstairs there was an old framed poster on a wall, which must have come out of an ancient forgotten pub. And rather than saying Old Cumber, spelled as it normally would be, it said Old Cumber, AULDCUMMER. I couldn't believe it. So foolishly, rather than saying to the man at the stall, I'll be back in 10 minutes and go to the cash point, will you keep it for me? I went to the cash point and I came back and it was gone. And what a
Willie Jack has it.
Well, he probably does. Subsequently, what I found was that they actually used that very briefly for a 15-year-old release in around mid 1880s, 1890s, something like that. And I missed it, you know. So I was always aware that there was a certain amount of historical linkage, but no idea of the magnitude. And yeah, you know, Fionnan has been wonderful in introducing me to things, which then send you down all sorts of wee avenues and rabbit warrens. But it's been a wonderful experience from start to finish.
Well, I think one of the things that a lot of people don't necessarily appreciate is that in and around 1900, Ireland was exporting 8.8 million gallons of whiskey, and 3/4 of that was coming out of Belfast, and a lot of it was heading to Scotland to be blended in to Scottish blends. I mean, there's this idea that Ireland never adopted the column still. Well, some guys did adopt the column still, and were doing extremely well out of doing it. And Dunville's being the primary one of that. Now, I brought this out. Now, this is an old bottle of Old Cumber, okay, that I have. This is a pot still whiskey. Now, this is a historic mash bill. Now, I can't not start talking about this because Fionn is doing, for anyone who doesn't know, he's doing a PhD in historic mash bills. Now, please God, don't let Brendan Curry be watching this because he'll kick off. But historically, Irish whiskey was considerably different than what it is today. And Fionn, without getting into giving us the full PhD level, tell us a bit more about historic Irish mash bills.
Grand. Well, I have a new chapter of the thesis. So I was hoping for a reviewer. So, you know,
Justin, you're up.
Oh, I don't have to read something about whiskey, do I? No. The book, I flicked through it. There was great pictures in the book, by the way.
Yeah, well, there's no pictures in the PhD. So, and the font is even smaller in the footnotes.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was very different. You know, obviously, now we're dealing with, for the most part, either malt or Irish pot still a la Irish distillers. You know, roughly 60% raw barley, 40% malt, between that and 50-50 depending. But the further back you get, the kind of dirtier and stranger it all starts to look. Even the Irish, and one thing that's in the PhD that doesn't get the same kind of jazz appeal as the pot still stuff is even the column still stuff that was running through Belfast looked really odd. I mean, like it was a quarter rye. Sometimes it had oats in it as well. They were using malted oats occasionally, but nobody really cares about single grain with the same Brendan Carty type fervor. Yeah, but again, an interesting story in its own right. But just keeping with the pot still stuff, of course, raw barley was a huge part of it then, as it is now, the defining part really. But then you also had large additions of oats, wheat, and to a much smaller extent rye. Rye in a big way in the column stills and a small way in the pot stills, right. And then oats in a big way in the pot stills, and wheat kind of flickering about. So yeah, a lot of that research was carried out in the Public Records Office of Northern Ireland out in Belfast. Actually, the most helpful archive I dealt with the entire time. They could not be more inviting, whatever, accommodating. And the old Cumber one was a bit of a mystery, because what happened was I saw that it was on the record in the catalogue, and I asked for it, and the fellow in Prony that day said, well, okay, we'll look down. He said, sorry, it's not there, which often happens in archives, especially large archives. Nobody really knows what is actually still there or whatever, or where, it's a lot wilder than I think we're given the image of. But anyway, I said, no problem. And I went back to my desk. I was actually reading the Dunville's board meetings instead, which didn't mention mash once, extremely eloquent, cursive, Victorian language. The board doth hitherto declare, blah, blah, blah. Not a mention of whiskey. Very, very, and of course, of the time, don't mention the dirty word in the room. How's all this money been accrued?
Oh.
It's all just part shares and part profits and blah, blah, blah. And I was going through this, Jesus. And then your man walks back with a big box and just plops it on, and I won't attempt an Ulster accent, but he says quite emphatically, knock yourself out, and you can interpret how that was delivered yourselves. And anyway, and then I opened it, and there it all was, the day books, because unfortunately that's usually the last thing to be preserved. The most commonly preserved things are tax records, because the government is interested, and then you get board meetings, things the company thought ought to be preserved, and then the last is what the people in the still house were doing each day. The kind of day-to-day, which is exactly what I'm looking for. It's the hardest to find. But I had it literally from the 1930s up until they closed. And it was remarkable. It didn't have mash bills, it had cut points, it had absolutely everything.
Oh, wonderful.
And so I ran into Jarlath Watson when I got out of Prony that day, and at the Duke of York, and he was bowled over, and he said, we're going to make 30 casts of this tomorrow, blah, blah, blah. And
what did Shane have to say about that?
Well, here's, it's funny because, and Jordan said, this will be our a one-off, blah, 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 just to look at it. Now I believe Shane has gone out and bought the name Old Cumber wherever he can, in whatever markets it's available. So I think Shane was quite impressed by the idea. I think it's come a long way from we'll make 30 casts tomorrow as a trial. But anyway, we asked very politely if they'd hold off doing that until we could film them doing it. And anyway, so the Old Cumber mash bill, which was 12% oats, 40% malt, 48% raw barley, double distilled, which is another curiosity. And anyone who's had Old Cumber whiskey, and of course there's really the two Old Cumbers, there's the real one, which is the one you're holding, and then unfortunately there's the dregs, the Hollywood and Donnelly bottle that turned up in the 80s, which was kind of sweepings of the place. But if you ever, and that stuff is really not a fair representation, but if you try the real one, it's one of the few whiskeys where the 30-year-old is cheaper than the 7-year-old at auction. But if you try it in its prime, it's Irish pot still is heavy enough stuff already because of the raw barley, but double distilled, it's as I said to Charlie at the time, you could sit a pencil on it. It's big head. Yeah, it's like American Jello almost. It feels like solidness.
Well, unfortunately, all of this stuff has become extremely collectible. This bottle I picked up a while back. I wouldn't sell this for less than £2,000. That's the truth. And I think it would be fair enough asking for that, Fionn.
You're asking like I go, I'm a terrible collector. I can't buy old whiskey.
Yeah.
I can't sit on it. I just crack it open and drink myself very quickly.
That's why I've got a lot of whiskey open, so I don't attack these things. But
I have absolutely no
self-control.
I know, and I have enough self-control to stop myself from giving myself the temptation, and I can live with that degree of self-control.
Now, Mark, you do a lot of program. I watched him, the Ulster Scots programming, and I do love what you do. When I was growing up, I'm sure you can probably tell, Ulster Scots was basically my lingua franca every day, and over the years it's sort of become a little bit more diluted. Being a tourist guide, when you've got someone from Pennsylvania, there's no really sat and talk about there because they haven't a clue what you're talking about. So
but you day when you're him among your reunions.
I can never remember me when they talk away, and sure they can what you're talking about anyway.
Can you stop? Because I have to put subtitles in this later on. It'll take ages.
Hang on, I've got my
brilliant Herbison unplugged. Fantastic. Fantastic.
He's an Ulster Scots poet from my beloved Ballymena, and he's a queer boy now. He's a queer boy, but no, there's actually a poem about drinking in it, but I'll not subject just to it. Okay, but David, but all the Ulster Scots stuff, and there is this culture. I think today Presbyterians are seen as being very conservative and very. Very conservative. But back in the day, they were the whiskey guys. They were the guys who domestically were distilling. The farmer tilled the land sort of thing, and a lot of the women running the house would have distilled. So they'd have probably had lots of their own domestic recipes or domestic mash bills. I say recipes because that's kind of the way they would have termed it. But they'd have had their own. Every farm nearly would have had a still, and that carried across over to the States.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that Fionnan showed me was what he called a heat map, which was a map of Ireland in a particular era, which I'll let him talk about. But you're absolutely right. Prior to the industrializing of large distilleries, the extent of home cottage hearthside production was just unbelievable. Fionnan, far away. Tell us the details.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As Mark said, the hearth side, and it's a good way to describe the hearth side industry, because now when we think of poaching, as when we think of even moonshine in the States, it's a kind of like a foxy guy outwitting the local, bumbling police officer.
The Dukes of Hazzard. It's the Dukes of Hazzard.
The Dukes of Hazzard, like Father Ted type Ireland, any of these kind of mythologies of, some fellow in a flat cap, again, foxing the guards. But when you look at the 1700s, it was a very, very real threat to the commerce of Parliament, legitimate tax-paying whiskey.
Parliament whiskey.
Yeah, and you look at the sheer volumes, and you get a very different sense of it. First of all, you get hearthside distilling, but more so, you get these kind of village endeavors where you get whole communities that are based around. I mean, people forget when the 1661 excise is first passed, it is not on distilleries, it is on still houses. And still houses were this idea, you had a communal center where you brought grains. There's eventually an artisan who distills it back for you. And it's that artisan class that eventually evolved into kind of professionalized distillers. But that intermediary between farmers doing it themselves is this communal still house. And what poaching preserves at a certain stage is this: you get places like Urris, infamously kind of blocked itself off and pelted, various people who look official from the Mamor Gap. With stones, but it was a real industry, and especially, you get, and the same thing happened in Scotland, again, like Speyside was basically created by the landlord class, fostering a way for tenants to pay rent, and there's a similar hypocrisy that goes on particularly in West Ulster, you get Inishowen, you know, which even if it wasn't made in Inishowen, the idea of smoked, usually illicit malt whiskey or malted barley and malted oats, you know, but still malted grains. And you start seeing people, you know, gentry members cellaring it, and it becomes this local curiosity. And them commenting that there's no palate for it in the like Georgian crowd down here, you know, and that, you know, they don't quite appreciate it. And it's this strange discount, and that whole story has been lost from Irish whiskey, as much from the history of Ulster distilling becomes really the history of malt, and even like, you know, and Mark and I have had this conversation many times. Bushmills, I can say it, used to be peated and used to advertise itself as peated in that old Inishowen flavor. Its neighbor, Coleraine, used to be peated and advertised itself as the old Inishowen taste. And so you get, you know, when you look, first of all, by 1850, there was essentially no malt whiskey south of Ulster. With the exception of a few experiments done by people who made pot still. But, you know, and that can't be overstated, because there's a lot of gibberish that goes around as we sell single malt Irish whiskey, because single malt is so sexy because of single malt Scotch that Ireland kind of wants in on this. But of course, you know, overwhelmingly, the history of Irish distilling is mixed mash bill.
Yeah.
With the exception of the North Ulster coast, Donegal, downward, and then a little way down as far as Dundalk. But that Dundalk to Antrim belt very soon gets eclipsed by column distilling, you know, because it was the industrial heartland and it made sense as a place for. Now you do get, you know, Watts out of column still out in Derry, etc. But really that Dundalk to Belfast strip is the hub, the nucleus. But even that Coleraine Bushmills, you know, when Alfred Barnard came to Ireland in 1886, there were two malt distilleries, Bushmills and Coleraine. And both of them were seemingly, Coleraine was unpeated at the time, and Bushmills, if it was still peated, was only likely. So Coleraine, I found a document where they say they stopped peating. Bushmills, it's harder to track, but both of them had their roots in this love affair with a style of spirit that was remarkably like what you see out in Islay and Campbellton, you know, and that always used to, and I've had quite an interest for a long time in that kind of there's really two bleeding grounds. There's the rural kind of folkloric bleeding ground that goes on, and then there's the more industrial later stage where you get the natural overlap between the industrial east of Ulster and the Scottish southwest of the Central Belt, Glasgow, and you get the big column still Titans. You know, without treading on air, I'm pretty sure a lot of the guys in Scotland saw Belfast essentially an extension of urban Scotland and had no problem just seeing stuff go back and forth, you know, and you get this kind of less romantic but still extremely interesting muddy water of column still industrial whiskey going back and forth, and nobody quite seems to know where it's coming from. And I'd seen that from a liquid standpoint, but it was really when I started talking to Mark, hearing how the branding was mixed up in that, how you start seeing these kind of co-equal brands. And I'll let Mark take it away from there.
Yeah, well, you know, as Fionnan has said there, and it's always, I mean, for me, it's genuinely refreshing to meet people who understand that continuum that there is across this very narrow strip of water, and whiskey is part of that story. And yes, when it becomes commercialized and branding and presentation becomes a mark of difference, you do see people like Watts up in Derry, Londonderry, who have, of course, Inishowen as a commercial brand. They have their own Tyrconnell, but they also have Craig Dew, old Highland Scotch, and they're marketing these two things simultaneously in the same publicity material. Together, Irish and Scotch. There's a wonderful mirror in a pub in Edinburgh that we were unable to go to film because of COVID restrictions. And an American friend of mine who lived there for a while told me about it. And it's about 10 foot wide, and Andrew A. Watt, fine whiskies, Londonderry and Glasgow, because they had no concept that the water was a barrier. They were quite comfortable to work on both sides. And whether that's the Beatons in the 11th and 12th century, or these entrepreneurial industrialists in the 19th century, the water doesn't matter. So Watts is one of those. You come on round, and you know, as Fionnan has mentioned there, Bushmills and Coleraine are unashamedly saying our stuff tastes like that stuff. Into Belfast, of course, Royal Irish Distilleries, Dunville's by Bladnoch and are operating there for a while with a number of Scotch brands. But even some that, like McConnell's, for example, which of course has just recently been revived. For a while, McConnell's owned Stromness in Orkney, and they were producing Old Crow Irish whiskey out of Belfast and Old Orkney whiskey out of Scotland, and again marketing them simultaneously. The same with Edward Cowan, who had inherited the family business. He was Lord Mayor of Belfast. He inherited his Uncle William's business. They had number 4 Old Irish whiskey. They also had Loch Lomond Special Scotch. And even, we've talked about Cumber in the 1950s even. And there was a family from Inverness called Gregor. Gregors were buying up all sorts of businesses in Scotland. And at the time, they momentarily, for 3 or 4 years, owned both Cumber and Bowmore on Islay. And when we went through Fionnan's introduction to meet Jim McEwen in his house in Islay, I asked Jim, do you remember anything about the Gregors? Because, of course, he began by skiving off school and working around the distillery, and his face lit up and he said, oh yeah, the Gregors, yes, they owned our distillery whenever I was a wee boy. And so that brings it right up into living memory. And when you start to see all the pieces of the puzzle come together, Mitchell's is another example, of course, a brother in Belfast, a brother in Glasgow. They're producing Irish and Scotch and marketing them together. When you see all the pieces, you stop thinking of where we live as 2 distinct countries or nations or islands, and you do start to see it as a single continuum. And it has been that for many, many centuries.
Yeah, for millennia, really. I mean, as I say, I constantly meet people who are even coming from the likes of Dublin or Belfast. That sounds daft, but people who are living in Belfast may not originally be from there, who have never been down the Northumberland coast before. And when they come down, they'll ask you, where is that over there? And you tell them it's Scotland. And they are puzzled by this. I mean, they just don't get how close it is. And it was much easier.
I've met people from Dublin who haven't been to Wicklow. There's a lot.
But to be fair, I met a guy from Brishean who I know quite well. Who came down after I moved down to Glenarm. He came down. And he didn't know that was Scotland. And he lives about 10 miles away. And I'm genuinely serious. No, unbelievable.
But no, of course, smuggling becomes part of that story as well, which we didn't really have time to get into. But when you can dodge the law and you've got a boat, I mean, why not? And
put it like this,
so commonplace.
Part 2 of the program, you can do.
Well, there were so many
revenge.
Things. Mark and I walked away saying, "Oh, there's a whole documentary in that, whether it be Inishowen and the lost." Spirit of the Puchy Moors, or the Pennsylvania Whiskey Rebellion, or just the history of cross-channel branding. There's so many topics.
There's so many
love to have gone into, and we were bound by kind of a broad, thesis, as it were, to move pace very, very quickly.
Yeah. For me, one of the most interesting aspects is whenever the Ulster Scots, when they came from Scotland, settled in Ulster, and then moved across to the US, they took that domestic sort of farm distilling with them because, I mean, it was a value-added product.
Yeah.
Now, I once got challenged about which of the big bourbon brands owe their lineage to Ulster Scots, and I said, well, it's not just as simple as that. The actual heritage, the Germans, if you like, the Ulster Scots ran into the Germans, and the Germans were great at fermenting and brewing beer, and these guys, the Presbyterians, who were very good at distilling, and you had this sort of combination, and other guys who popped in and then took it off and ran with it,
Yeah, I mean, well, there's also, I mean, as you say, popped off and ran with it. The history of the brands is much, much later, as I'm sure is obvious, than the history of the drink. So that what happens is people say, oh, well, if that's the case, then can I see on a label now? Now, Mark actually has plenty of those connections to labels.
I'm going to get one.
Well, Mark's fetching that. We do touch briefly on, and one thing, the great kind of the great tragedy of, and I know Mark and I have had this conversation, the great tragedy of COVID, we were amazed that we got to Islay despite COVID being in force. You know, I was shocked. What didn't get to happen that we'd originally intended to do was to go out to West Pennsylvania, to the heartland of the Whiskey Rebellion. And if you look at that moment, the kind of nascent, and you're not really, bourbon doesn't exist at that point.
No.
It's not even a state at that point. But when you look at that natural migration of, Scotch Irish out to the west of Pennsylvania, along with Germans and along with Scots from just straight from Scotland, and you see this transformation of whiskey into, well, not transformation, because it had been that already, this use of whiskey as tradable currency, as, something that couldn't be taxed in premise because it's supplanting money in the first place. And I think that's a huge part of what promotes the Whiskey Rebellion. And if you look at the rebellion itself, especially among the leadership level, there is, you get guys like William Findlay or James McFarland or any, the guys behind, even Breckenridge was from Campbellton. But now he's kind of an exterior figure, but right at the core, Findlay and McFarland are, I know McFarland was from Dungannon. I've never quite been able to trace William Findlay's actual birthplace within Ulster.
Antrim. It was somewhere in Antrim.
Yeah, nobody seems to actually know.
Probably Ballymena.
Maybe.
Glenarm.
Call it quits and say it was Glenarm. But and of course, they meet at Mingle Creek Presbyterian Church, and a lot of them are buried there. And we had hoped to go and I have seen before McFarland's grave, and it's fantastic. It's the kind of like shot in the back by cowards, kind of, the assassination of Jesse James, coward Robert Ford kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And but to see, the birthplaces there would have been really, I think, moving. And we had to accommodate not being able to go out. So that was, Pennsylvania, and that link to America, I think, was the one part of the program that really took a hit from COVID. Yeah. But, at the same time, I'm amazed by how much stuff we did get in. We were still brimming for ideas and space, even trying to deal with what we had, so hint, BBC, if there's
BBC
for a Whiskey Rebellion documentary.
There's listen, the thing about whiskey, the thing that differentiates whiskey from every other spirit, with the possible exception of some rums, is the fact that you do have a history. All the rest of them, vodka's vodka. Gin. Oh, people they talk about, the bringing a pint of gin and all that kind of stuff. It's not a great history of gin, to be honest.
Oh, in fact, the thesis chapter I just finished literally was a defense of why whiskey did not degrade into gin. Why the same shared laws did Irish and Scotch whiskey not just become industrial London hooch? It has a surprisingly long time to make that argument. Thank heaven it didn't.
But that's it. And whiskey does have, and Waterford and the terroir, that's always been a bit on, certainly on marketing. People turn around and they say it's the terroir. They might buy their grain from somewhere else, and they might even get their water from somewhere else, etc., etc. But it's that sense of place, and whenever you have whiskey, does that in a way that really very few other spirits actually capture. They can talk about Russian vodka and Polish vodkas and stuff, but it's not really that different. I mean, it's basically ethanol and water is what you're buying when you buying your vodkas.
I think the difference there, Marty, is that for some reason, what I've learned over the last 3+ years is that a whiskey audience cares about the stories.
Yeah, they do.
And that's not often the case for all sorts of other products, but for some reason, the story really matters. It brings a lot of value. It brings a lot of interest, a lot of emotional appeal.
Yeah.
And having said that, history can be really boring and absolutely commercially irrelevant. So it's how it's done and whether it's worth reviving some of these old stories, or indeed, as you were showing earlier on, doing something fresh and new that's very now. These are the marketing challenges for today. But I'm going to jump back actually just for a moment, if you don't mind.
That bottle, yeah.
Yeah, here we are now. I'm never great at seeing where the focus field is on computer cameras, but anyway, here's the story. This is Old Thompson, as you can see. It's Kentucky whiskey. It is from a distillery called Glenmore. Now, the story here is that there were 6 brothers, and they were born in a tiny townland outside Londonderry, outside Eglinton, called Longfield. 3 of the brothers went to Kentucky around 1870. 3 of them stayed at home. 2 of whom became Presbyterian ministers. 2 of the Kentucky guys became distillers. And this is one of their huge brands. Now, it would have been wonderful to have visited there, but their headquarters now in Owensboro, just on the banks of, I think it's the Ohio River, is now the US headquarters for Sazerac. So that the work that these guys did, leaving here that a century plus ago, still carries on and echoes down through the ages. They were not related to me. Sadly, there isn't some huge fortune that I'm about to inherit, but it's just one of those huge American brands that we hoped we could go and visit and tell a wee bit more of the story of. But linking Ulster and America, as you mentioned earlier, Marty, unashamedly Presbyterian ministers on one side of the family and unashamedly distillers on the other side. There is all sorts of complexity.
Well, what usually surprised me when I first started really looking into to whiskey and stuff was the Presbyterian ministers used to make an appeal to their congregation not to get drunk in church. They used to sit and actually drink while the service was going on, and they used to say to them, could you please stop?
Yeah, listen. I have a friend who'll not name. He's a Presbyterian minister in Mid-Antrim, so you may well know him. And he does actually spend quite a lot of time in the States with other people out there. And American Presbyterians will really care about having whiskey either from Ulster or from Scotland, because to them it's a sense of connection with the old country and with back home.
Yeah, I watched a documentary there, was it last week maybe, about a guy called Popcorn Sutton, who I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
And Popcorn was proud of his sort of Scots-Irish heritage and the moonshine. Yeah. And I do. It's kind of sad, but it's still true. He got found with, was it 800 gallons of illegal moonshine, and he was going to go and do 3 years jail. So he decided, I'm not doing that. I'm taking my own life. And at the bottom of his grave, he has Popcorn says,
He's one of those last, because I have friends in America who are distillers who speak about him as if he's some sort of, long gone legend, and he hasn't been gone that long, and even people who knew him speak about him as, the last of the great American moonshiners. I mean, even the nicknames they would give each other, Popcorn Sutton. I, to this day, have not gotten a definitive answer to why he was nicknamed Popcorn. Other than corn itself, I assume it's to do with distilling maize, popcorn as the moonshine.
I've read about 4 or 5 different ones, and I'm not 100% sure what it is. But I mean, this guy was just a legend, and he took pride in his Scots-Irish roots.
Listen, we've got to ask you about the branding, because Maury said we should ask you about the branding, because we had Leigh Houston on, who's done this cuvee for Waterford. I'm gonna show you. I stopped my video and I can show it here. What do you make of that?
Put it up full screen, Justin.
Can you see each other?
Can you see that? No, can you
see when it was at full screen? I couldn't see it. Well, of course, I couldn't see it.
Yeah. Now, what do you make of that? What do you make of that?
Well, it's clearly the human genome, which is very important. The DNA of a whiskey is there in the Marsh Bells.
Well, listen, that's what I got from it too. I thought it was like the infinity of the Solera method. That's what I got from it.
It's a worm, clearly.
Yeah, well, but listen, it doesn't jump out from you. There's the Waterford bottle on Marty's desk. The bottle's very distinctive. That must be the most distinctive label you'll ever see in a whiskey, ever.
I think it's so. I think it's awesome. Yeah. If I'm totally honest, I think if it's sitting up on the shelf, you're going to know from a mile away exactly what it is. You know,
it's all about the audience, really.
Yeah.
I mean, different type of people are attracted by different types of presentation. I mean, for what it's worth, I for my clients who listen to me, and not all of them do, but for those who do, there's a number of 3-stage processes. But the first one is, catch the eye, stick in the mind, and be taken to heart. And you want people to love your brand and to care about it. Yeah. And that also means that there will be people who will hate it and who will be repulsed by it. But you want to have passionate, loyal customers who become passionate, loyal brand ambassadors. And producing generic wallpaper graphics ends up appealing to nobody. If the branding becomes a kind of a forum for diplomacy around a boardroom table or around a kitchen table, you end up with something that's a camel in it, and it doesn't work. I have to say, I really admire what Waterford have done there. I think it's bold and it's different, and it'll get talked about, and they're getting coverage tonight because of the bravery that they're showing there with their brand.
Yeah, I think it looks snazzy. It looks iconic. It's got an appeal to it that not really anything else has. And there's certain other things going on at Waterford that I have a lot of time for, if I'm honest. I like passion in anything. If somebody's passionate, I find it infectious. Yeah. And any time I talk to anybody from Waterford, they're passionate about it. So good on them.
That's good. Marty, can I say hello to, very briefly, gentlemen, sorry, can I say hello to Trevor and Darren, who I saw putting some comments on there. Haven't seen either of them in person in a really, really long time. But hello, gentlemen. Nice to kind of connect with you again.
What do you think this is? The One Show?
except the Pars bottles are an abomination. Why would you change Pars gold label and turn it into that silly diamond thing? I don't get it. Now, speaking of Pars, Fionnan, I have this bottle.
Oh Jesus! And here was me hiding on my bottles of Powers. Like I said, I
have this bottle. Now, this is one from John's Lane. Now, this is a pot still, obviously. What would be in that? What would be the pot still recipe for that?
I can't talk too much about recipes outside Cumber because we have the panel coming up and they're all supposed to be walking in.
Okay, right.
Yeah, episode to come. But Powers is really, when you're talking about Dublin, you're talking about the Dublin mash bill more than breakdowns. And I think that's one thing that's going to come as a shock to a lot of people is how similar a lot of them are to each other at various stages, but certainly when that was laid down, the people who are surviving, I mean, it is a process of steady homogenization, but Dublin already had its kind of descending order of adjuncts worked out. Powers had quite a high malt content as compared to many people, which is surprising considering how thick Old Powers is. You'd expect it to be the other way around. But by the time, one of the big break, probably the most important document in the thesis was a 1950s letter by the Irish Pot Still Distillers Association. And it was them outlining practice. And the reason that one was interesting, because it's so late, because if you lay something down in 1955, that's what a 7 and a 12-year-old are in the 1960s. And in 1967, everything changed, or after 1967, 1968, everything changed to blends. So it was confirmation of what old generation pot still was, and by then it seems to have homogenized, whereas before you get more variation. But Bow Street and Powers were not all that different, again, different. And again, it's not hard. When I said Cumber is 12% oats, that's my averages. Some days they come and there's not enough oats and you still run the distillation, and you're dealing with, 100-weight sacks. So again, everything kind of vibrates internally. So like one thing for the thesis, the ones that are in the panel, everything had to be decimalized. So we get some mash bills where there's actually two of them represented because we had to decimalize in one direction and decimalize up in the other, round up in the other direction.
Yeah.
So, you know, by the time that was laid down, we're talking 20% other stuff, and most of that would have been oats and then wheat. And then you're seeing who is still using rye, and that kind of drops off one by one.
Yeah.
And rye, even a lot of them, you know, rye gets mentioned quite frequently, but for a lot of the Irish pot stills, rye was about 2%. You know, it was a really small, and one of the great unanswered questions I have is to why anyone would bother with 2% rye. Why was that done? So there's a lot of questions I haven't found an answer for yet. But certainly when you're talking about Old Dublin, you're talking about roughly across all of them 20% other stuff, with oat being the big one.
Now you're doing an experiment with the Bowen Distillery to manufacture, and with a few other people as well, to bring some of these old mash bills back to life again. So will we be able to see an Ecklandville pot still that you have created that was an old recipe from somewhere else?
Well, yeah, I mean the whole idea of the thesis is, so Bowen are carrying out the core experiment of the thesis, which is the large scale all day affair, 30 distillers sitting in a room from all across the industry, nosing samples and whatnot, and then that information is going back out to them, and that's hand in hand with lab work that I'll actually be going to Edinburgh relatively soon for the partner universities, Harriet Watt out there, and hopefully we'll have that lab analysis in hand before the panel even sits. The panel will be in July as restrictions allow, anyway, that's all made possible by the fact that yes, Bowen made it, but the information belongs to everyone. Now, before we were doing the core project, I had been quite free with distillers about stuff before. I've had to shut my mouth in the last months because, and hope whoever heard that.
Is that possible? Is that possible?
Yeah. So I mean, like, it doesn't help. Like, Graham Miller is one of the panelists, so you know it's
All right.
it's very difficult. But as part of the doc, we did, you know, and this was before any of the Bowen stuff happened. The day I found the Ecklandville stuff again, or the Old Cumber stuff, Jarlath said that they were enormously interested because they're not that far from Cumber themselves.
No.
And again, there is that idea. It was the last Ulster pot still, you know, it was the last double distilled pot still for the geeks. You know, there's a lot of stuff that was cool about Old Cumber, and there's a lot of nostalgia for it. Now, what Ecklandville did was a direct recreation. So they did literally, you know, 12% oats, 48% malt or barley.
You're not getting into trouble for saying this, by the way.
No, because in other ones it's been, it's, you know, everything else has been again decimalized into sets of 5%, and also everything else was done under shared conditions. So everything was distilled, taken at the exact same cut point, same fermentation point. Everything had to be standard, so that the only variable from a scientific perspective is the changing mash bill. Whereas with what we did with Ecklandville, we were looking at those sources and saying, oh, well, that's where they took their cut points here, and we were able to really, you know, allow them to kind of like hobble together something very, very close to, you know, and it was double distilled. And I remember going through the books. I took Graham into into Prony, and we were going through the records, and he was going, wow, how did they manage to get that point on that kit, blah blah blah, with those percentages? And then he was pointing at stuff. He says, I know a lad that's just signing off at the end of a day when I see one. This isn't incomplete. You know, this isn't, you know, and there is that side of it, unfortunately, with all of them. Wherever I found them, when you get into the 50s, a lot of the records become really sloppy because you get the sense that the places are dying and people aren't too fussed. Whereas when you see stuff in the 20s and even the 30s, you know, it's very in depth. It's very, you know, replete. But yeah, so the Bowen stuff is thesis proper. The Ecklandville stuff was kind of a bit of fun on the back of the thesis that Ecklandville, and it was great. It's a different manifestation of the research, you know.
But the thing is, Mark, you must be the likes of that. You must be excited that you're actually going to be able to taste something, essentially something recreated from the 1920s and 30s, in where you're from. I mean, that must be in some ways exciting for you too.
Yeah, well, it's one thing to revive a brand and to reproduce fonts and color schemes and illustrations and all that, but to actually be able to recreate a vintage antique liquid from a mash bill, I mean, that's time travel. That's absolutely incredible.
It is.
And somebody very wisely there, whose name I didn't quite catch, commented that who cares about the labeling as long as the liquid is special.
Yeah.
And, oh my goodness. I mean, how special is this going to be? Now, I'm going to have to say the labeling's has to live up to the quality of what's inside.
That's a designer in you doing this.
There we go. Yeah. As long as the juice is good, who cares? I'll not continue with the rest of that remark there. But yeah, the labeling
is true.
Yeah, the labeling and the presentation and the messaging has got to be right for today. But oh my goodness, to be able to have something inside there that is authentically that old is astonishing.
Yeah, well, I'm beginning to have a little bit of an epiphany on certain things. I was telling people about this last week. Okay, this is a bottle of Johnnie Walker Red Label, the best-selling Scotch in the world. Okay, blend, very cheap, and the difference between this from the 1960s and today is like chalk and cheese. Justin was blown away by just how different it was, and that idea of flavor drift and things being changing and so on and so forth. Back in the day, people had lots more flavor in a glass than we do today. We just do. Yeah.
But that's the case across all sorts of food and drink products, because there's all sorts of mechanization of processes, legislation and regulations, and all of that has a role. The bread we eat today isn't the same as our bread would have been.
It's not. And I honestly think that the best days of whiskey are probably in the future. It's probably 10 years from now, people will start to be going, my God, this is so much better than we had 10 years ago. And the likes of Waterford, what they're doing with the terroir stuff and the organic and the biodynamic growers and all this kind of stuff, I think we're heading towards something being even better.
Mean, it's funny because whiskey was a kind of a delayed, well, not delayed in the large sense, part of this history. If you look, and I think people forget this, if you look at the period where a lot of these distilleries collapsed, you're talking about 1890 to 1930. And really what happens during that period is a move towards standardization, towards industrialization had already happened, but large scale sales, large scale production, but also a different kind of ethos. And a time when people, one thing that Cumber made possible in whiskey, and you see it happening in bread and all kinds of other food products, is reliability. What's for sale is that a Johnnie Walker in New York tastes the same as a Johnnie Walker in Hong Kong, tastes the same as a Johnnie Walker in London. And the story of the 20th century is a story, at least in the West, of people embracing and running after a concept of modernity that was all about brands as large-scale reliable products, because what had come before was shaky reliability, was dubious practice, and all kinds of questions that big brands with big consistency put to rest. And it's only now on the far side of century of this that we're looking back at the 90s and thinking, geez, why did everyone eat all this Wonder Bread? This stuff is boring as all hell. Why don't we get back to this lovely rye bread people were eating in Germany in the 1650s? And as well, there was, it's a different attitude, and we've taken the best of the past, but with the securities afforded by industrialization,
absolutely,
and reimagined it. But we're not seeing is like suspect. Is this really a Bushmills kind of?
And they've been focused so much on getting yield because let's be honest. Up until the last century, people were at the vagaries of the weather. If the weather was bad, people basically starved and people were hungered. And in the last century, that hasn't been. So people have been focused so much on yield that they've been breeding stuff to produce a huge amount of yield over quality or flavour. And now we understand how things work, and we have much better controls, and we have much better methods of food production. I think you would possibly start seeing it rolling back. Now, other things.
That's what Connor's saying there. He's saying batch variation became the enemy, and now it's beginning to be actively sought again. That's basically what Waterford's doing, isn't it?
Yeah, and other people are doing the same thing. But it's this idea. People want a consistent product. When you reach a bottle off the shelf, you want it to be the same as before. But if you take this and compare it to today's product, you have a flavour drift because people have got a sweeter palate now. They want things to be sweet and sugary. That's why diabetes is so prevalent these days. But they do, and when you take that away and you get a standard product, and people start going, "Oh, we need to add stuff to this." Well, you're increasing what people can sell you as well. If you get something there's not an awful lot of flavour in, they want to put something on top of that to add flavour. So it's another chance for people to sell you stuff. That all works in.
What I've moved on to now, and again, a lot of blended people don't pay for blended whiskey of the past. So you can pick up like 90s Blackbush for not too much, 80s Blackbush, I have
about 4 bottles of it sitting here.
Yeah, and it's astounding trying even just 80s, 90s, 80s now and seeing that flavor drift occur, and what I'm drinking now is 90s Blackbush. And the reason I picked the 90s is because, there's, when you go back as far as the 80s, you're dealing with different, some of the grain might still be in there that early on. But the recipe between the 90s and now hasn't changed. It's 80% malt whiskey, 20% grain pot light, the weird Blackbush grain whiskey they make down in Middleton. And within that shared context, it has still drifted. But when you talk about, again, you look at, and now again, that's a minority grain whiskey, but what grain whiskey did was stabilize that drift as best as possible. But even Johnny Walker drifts, even though it's 80% grain whiskey. Whereas if you look before, you get wild variation. So, we do touch on the column still, and especially in the context of industrialization in Belfast. And you get that shift from the likes of Old Cumber, which would have been, again, agrarian, traditionalist, distilled, variable, to the likes of Dunvilles, who copped it. That, to build a brand, you needed scale and you needed reliability. And they start into column stills. And, it's funny because a lot of the other distilleries in Belfast, you look at Conswater, they just made grain whiskey and pumped it out the door. Admiral was even a bit sketchy. Whereas Dunvilles made pot and column and blended it. They were essentially doing what Middleton do now, long before, before the formation of Irish distillers, they had copped the necessity of producing a house blend on scale, but with flavor, etc. But that became the story of the 20th century. And I think, we could only include, much as I would have loved to include as many distillers as would show up, we really earmarked Killowen, Bushmills, and Ecklenville for that reason, with Bushmills being the heritage, and then the other two, Killowen representing, again, that return to agrarian.
What's your favourite mash bill that you've worked on over the last year? Asked Peter Galbraith.
Well, again, I can't talk about any of the ones that are in the thesis July 18th. But
we're going to have you back on.
Yeah.
We're going to have you back on.
I feel like Mark Hamill, before Empire.
And Trevor Watson is
saying later.
Trevor Watson is saying he'd like to go to a barbecue with the 4 of us. It would be a great evening. It wouldn't be Trevor because I eat everything. Isn't that right, Marty? Yeah.
Yes. I've just noticed it's 11:45. I do, guys. Honestly,
wow.
Our shows normally last an hour, and I think it's a bit of a it sort of tells you just what's going on here. This is nearly double that. I think what we'll do is we'll call it a night. Otherwise, Fionn, I'll be here at about 3 o'clock in the morning with you and end up absolutely monkeyed again. Now, what time's the show on tomorrow night?
10 o'clock, BBC Two NI. I'm sure if you got some clever box and you're somewhere within a BBC region, you can find us away down in the very obscure numbers.
It is. I've put details how people can do that.
Oh, very good.
You scroll down into the 900s, you'll find it. Or if you put in a postcode starting with BT 38 9DE, you will reach in your box.
Or
right?
even better,
I'm just thinking 9DE, of course. Yeah.
I'll record it, and anybody who wants to watch it, just come round to Glenarm, and you can come up in here and we'll have a drink and watch it. How's that sound?
But you know, as Fionnan was saying there, that there's just so much that couldn't be fitted in. I haven't even seen the final edit myself, but they say that normally when a TV program's being made, they shoot an hour for every minute that is broadcast. I think in this case they maybe shot twice or three times that much. And Sean said to me at one point, this is like trying to fit a duvet into a sock. So there's going to be a whole lot of things that just had to be left out for all sorts of reasons. But so many individuals have been interviewed and gave of their time. So many venues allowed us into their premises under all sorts of COVID restrictions. And my enormous thanks to all of them, but in particular, honestly, to Fionnan for giving of his expertise and enthusiasm and his theatricality and how he tells these stories as well. I hope everybody really enjoys it tomorrow night.
Listen, I think everybody. I talked to a lot of people. Loads of people have come up and said to me, "You know, there's a show on Sunday night." I said, "Do you know there's a show on Saturday night where I interview the two guys that are doing it?" You know, so I'm interested in hearing about this, and it's that nice to have that connection to the history and to be able to pick up a bottle of something and taste the past, and that's just something you can't do really with anything else. And Whisky's fabulous for doing that.
As Mark said, it was a relief, you know. Again, and a lot of people helped us. I still remember the eerie feeling of simulacra being in the Duke of York. You know, how did you spend lockdown? In a pub, pretending to be drinking in a pub. You know, feeling of the settlement.
Some of which was actually just tap water. I mean, we were pretending it wasn't, but it was actually tap water.
No, I don't believe that for a single second. There's no way Fionnan is in the Duke of York drinking tap water.
We were for a whole afternoon tap water, and that's all it was.
But like, as you see, if you're wanting to find the old Cumber, think, Willie, Jack, is there any chance of getting in here? Because
honestly, you see, if anybody out there has that, I will sell a kidney or two just to get it.
No, it's illegal in the UK to sell organs, so don't be doing that.
Well, that was
one is 98B2 when you're typing into the film. A very decent lad. Negotiate on your behalf. He recently hacked into the health service gallery.
The North Koreans have him banned. The North Koreans have him banned. Guys, listen, it's been an absolute pleasure. Honestly, I'll get talking to you again, I'm sure, in the very, very near future. The show, I can't wait to see it, and I think it's the first. There's going to be more episodes of this, or more sequels to this than there is of the Rocky franchise, I think.
Well, there's a lot more that could be done. It's up to all sorts of other people to decide whether there's an interest in doing that. But there's a lot more that could be done on this island. There's a lot more that could be done in Ulster. There's a lot more that could be done in Scotland. And of course, as Fionnan was saying, I would love to sit on a pew in Mingo Creek Presbyterian Church and feel that rebellion against the government rising within me.
Hamilton, where is he?
Well,
last war, now he's taxing us.
I can tell this story about a Presbyterian minister because it's true, and I can't defame anybody because they're dead now, and they're also a member of my family. My dad used to go poaching with his great uncle, who was a Presbyterian minister.
Yeah.
You know, and he used to ask him, "Don't worry about getting caught, son. One of these is for the policeman." so there you go. So yes, it's probably correct, all that about Presbyterians. There you go. What a great show, guys. Listen, it's been fabulous. We'll let you go. Marty and me will wrap up, I think, will we? Yeah.
We'll get wrapped up. And
Thanks very much, guys. It's been great.
Guys, speak to you soon.
All right.
See you soon.
Cheers. Now, Marty, what do you think of that? What do you think of that tonight?
What can you say? I mean, here's guys talking about our local history, mine and your local history, and just how important it is, which is close to my heart. And Fionn, I mean, the guy's just an absolute wealth of knowledge. There's nothing he doesn't know about Irish whiskey. His PhD, I don't know. I can't think of anybody that's got a PhD that's going to be coming out that's even remotely as anticipated as this.
Well,
I
know that. There you go. What are people saying tonight? Thanks very much for the great show. Wonderful show. Have a dream night, lads. There's Connor saying Fionn is a whiskey genius. Whiskey Jesus. Jesus. He can turn water into new make.
Listen, I spent 4.5 hours on the phone with him the other night, and last week I was on the phone with him for about 3 hours at a time. And me and him just sitting chatting, bounce off each other and talk about everything. And the other night, all I heard was the clink of a glass. And he and I sat and talked for 4.5 hours. And in the absence of being able to go to the pub, it's just fabulous to be able to talk to something like that, you know.
Okay. People were asking us about where can they hear the show, and I have the full details here. You can go and see. You can see it in the UK and Ireland. People down south can know how to get BBC Two Northern Ireland. If you have satellite, you can get it on FreeSat. It's in the 900s somewhere in there. I had the exact number somewhere, but you will find it. It's BBC Two Northern Ireland. BBC Two is normally the same output, but there is opt-out hours, so that's where you'll find it. You can find it in iPlayer if you type in the correct details. So you need to understand how to type in the correct details, okay? So you basically lie, and you type in the correct details, and if you have a VPN, you'll be able to watch it as well. And you'll want to see this show because there is online a clip of it, but it is the BBC. So go to that link that I've put up here, and you can watch it there. It is fabulous. It is fabulous. And basically, we need to thank the BBC for letting those guys come on tonight. Yeah.
So, and listen, the BBC, I honestly love everything they do, and I love the BBC for what they do. They do this local, regional programming, and these kind of shows wouldn't be made if it wasn't for the license fee, to be honest.
Well, that's right. There is Ulster Scots and Irish language program, and it's very, very much centered on the tourist industry, which is close to our heart. A lot of it, it's exploring stuff, and it's fantastic. There's Kitty Dances saying, "You guys are awesome. I love this conversation. How often do we do this show? We're dead easy to find." Keely, you can ask the smart speaker to play the Irish Whiskey Review podcast. You'll also find us on YouTube and on Facebook and on Instagram and on LinkedIn at Irish Whiskey Review. Now, the live show goes out on the two channels we can go out on live. That's Facebook and YouTube every Saturday night. Hail, rain or shine at 10 p.m. And usually the guest is live, but sometimes they're recorded because we had a recorded guest tonight too. And Lee Houston was excellent as well, wasn't she?
Yes, it's a fabulous girl. It was great. It was great getting talking to her. And filling us in. We had a lot of conversation off camera as well, and she's really, really funny, witty, and so on and so forth. Lovely girl.
She was very good. Okay. Well, I think we'll get to bed. I know I'm taking the opportunity to go out in the good weather, 22 degrees up the north coast tomorrow. Where are you going to, Marty?
I'm working tomorrow, Justin. I'm working in Glenarm Castle tomorrow.
Are you working in Glenarm Castle? There you go. I will be having something nice and native or bothy coffee or something like that tomorrow while you're slugging your guts out.
Well, tell William to if he wants to send me down a wee packet of coffee, I'd be happy to take it.
All right. Listen, thank you very much, folks, for watching tonight. Remember to comment, like, and share, and we will catch you again. What's the podcast this week, actually?
I don't know.
Do we know?
No, Justin. I don't do these things. We picked the content about Tuesday evening. And oh no, hang on. Japanese whiskey this week.
I thought you had to say that. Yes, it's Japanese this week. We're talking Japanese this week. We'll be putting that out. And you can enjoy that.
And this is a special whiskey. This is a special type of whiskey.
Yeah, because I don't think people will have heard of it before. We'll leave them in suspense. You need to go to where you get your podcasts on Wednesday, and you'll hear all about the Japanese whiskey. There's Sean McClanahan saying the Bothy whiskey coffee is fantastic. It certainly is. It is indeed. Great show, Michael Matthews is saying. Thank you very much for that. Yes, it's a good show. Remember, watch it again on repeat, because there's lots of new stuff in there for me as the lay person. It was pretty intense at some point.
Listen, anytime you talk to Fionnan, there's lots of new stuff for everybody, because he knows more about Irish whiskey than anybody on earth. That's the truth. He's just a fabulous guy.
Right. So, but he actually doesn't work in the industry at all, really, does he?
He's an academic. He's his full-time job's doing a PhD in Irish Marsh Bells.
That's incredible stuff. Right.